How do you know which direction to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs? Was it right to left to right, top to bottom? In this video, I'll walk you through what you need to know to be able to figure out which direction to read hieroglyphs. Welcome to Voices of Ancient Egypt, where we demystify the words and lives of the ancient Egyptians through animated videos like this one. If you're new here, I'd love to have you subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss future videos like this one. Hi everyone! So how do you know what direction ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs go in? That's what we'll get into today. But first, if you haven't already watched my previous videos in this series on how to read hieroglyphs, check out the links in the description below or what pops up in the cards in the top right-hand corner. Now, let's jump right in. Let's take a look at this stone slab, which is called a stela. This one belonged to a man named Heku, and it has several rows of texts as well as a couple of columns too. Which direction do you think one should read these hieroglyphs? Should we go from left to right to left, top to bottom? Pause this video for a moment and think about it. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to think about it, I'll tell you that this is actually a bit of a trick question, because the part on the right side is actually read from left to right, while the part on the left side is read from right to left. I know, you're probably all going, oh, really? Right about now? As my students always do when I pull this trick in the classroom. But it's a good illustration of how flexible the ancient Egyptians were when it came to the direction of writing. What mattered most when carving hieroglyphs into stone or painting them on a wall like this was the aesthetics. That is, how good they looked and how evenly they were spaced. Sometimes they wrote only in one direction on a monument, but often they wrote in both directions in order to make something like the stela look more balanced, to have a kind of symmetry. And each side oftentimes looks like pretty much a mirror image of the other. So how do you know which way to read? Take a look at the hieroglyphs, particularly those of people and animals. Do you see how on one side they're all facing one way, and then on the other side they're all facing the other way? This is the key to reading in the correct direction. The hieroglyphs always face towards where you should start reading. In other words, you read into the faces of the animals and people. Therefore, if the figures all face towards the left, then you should read from left to right. If instead they face all towards the right, then you should read from right to left. So let's go back to the stela of Heku. Take a look at the animals and people again. This will tell us that we should start reading in the center for each line, moving out towards the edge. Reading should always start at the top and then move down. In this case, each side of the line is its own separate text, so you can really read them in any order, either left first or right first. But the ancient Egyptians probably intended you to start in the top left in this case, because that's where the most important person, that is Heku, is both shown and named. Then you would read the right-hand side in the same manner, starting in the center and then going from left to right. Then you would move down to the second row of text. An interesting feature of this stela is that in this case, the artist seems to have not accounted for space properly, and he actually ran out of space at the end of the rows, particularly on the left-hand side. As you can see, he finished up with a few of the signs just below the line, rather than in the line. Now, usually, Egyptian draftsmen and sculptors planned out their compositions pretty well so that this wouldn't happen. But occasionally, they didn't, and they ran into issues like this, where things didn't quite fit. And on the right-hand side, you can notice that the lines there, they don't run down below the line, but they still make the signs smaller at the ends to squeeze them in, so they didn't plan quite right on that side either. Let's look at another example. This is the wooden sarcophagus of a priestess of the goddess Hathor, who is named Henhenet. Which direction should we read the text on this sarcophagus? First, let's see what we have for animals and people among the hieroglyphs. Aha! You can see here that they are all facing towards the left in this case, so the entire text should be read from left to right, reading into the faces of the hieroglyphs. Alright, so now that we've established the basic direction to read in, what do we do when hieroglyphs are stacked on top of each other in a line that we should read from left to right, or right to left? Before getting into that, I wanted to let you guys know that I have a free guide on how to read hieroglyphs and how they basically work, which you can pick up at my website, voicesofancientegypt.com/guide, which is also linked in the description below. So hit pause, go grab the guide, and then come right back. Okay, so how do we read hieroglyphs that are stacked on top of each other in a line that we would normally read from left to right, for example? Let's zoom in and take a closer look at Heku's Stela by reading through the second line on the right-hand side. This bit of text includes what's called an offering prayer, which in this case is for the woman who sits below the line, and it also includes the name of the woman. First, let's look at which way the signs are facing. Here we have a seated woman hieroglyph and it's facing towards the left. So where do we start reading? At the left end of the line, of course, which is in the middle of the stela. This first group of signs at the beginning introduces what's called an offering prayer. It basically says, an offering which the king gives. And this is a very formulaic beginning that you always see in these offering prayers. However, the signs are in a bit of a funny order, but that's a topic for a future video. Let's move on to the next set of signs. If you've watched my videos on the so-called hieroglyphic alphabet, you may already recognize some of these signs. As we read from left to right, some signs will also be stacked vertically, because the ancient Egyptians liked to fit in all of the needed signs in the neatest, most evenly spaced way that they could, and they always wanted to avoid any awkward, empty spaces. When carving hieroglyphs, aesthetics were important. So when we see them stacked like this, we read from top to bottom first before moving on to the right. So with this group here, for example, we start at the top with this box, which represents the sound of the letter P. Then we read down to the bread loaf, which represents the sound of the letter T. Then we move to the right and have this twisted rope or wick, which represents a kind of breathy H sound. Altogether, this spells the name of the god Ptah. Next, you may recognize this wavy water hieroglyph as representing the sound of the letter N. In between the two N's is a sign that represents Ka, K-Aleph, which is a word for an Egyptian type of spirit. Put together, these three signs read, for the Ka of. Following this, we have the title and name of the woman. It says Nebet Per Neferu, that is the lady of the house, Neferu. The woman's name is Neferu, and she has this title, Lady of the House, which indicates that she was a female head of household. Then the final part here reads Ma'at Cheru, that is true of voice. Now this lets us know that this woman, Neferu, has either already or is expected to pass judgment and be able to enter the afterlife. Let's look at one final example. This is a writing board that a scribe in training would have used to practice writing hieroglyphs in ink. Now, since he was writing in ink, these hieroglyphs are what we might call cursive hieroglyphs. They're still full hieroglyphs, but they're not as detailed as the ones you would see carved in stone, for example. Now, with a writing board like this, when the scribe was finished, he could either wash away the ink or put a new coating of whitewash on it so they could use the board over again. Lucky for us, the last use of the board was not erased. So if we wanted to read it, which direction should we go in? Let's see. We have a few seated people here, some birds, and even an ox. All of them face towards the right. So this entire board should be read, starting at the top, of course, then from right to left in each row. Now that you've learned the basics of how hieroglyphs work and what direction to read them in, let's learn to read and write some basic phrases in the next video, which you can find here. And if it's not out yet, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you won't miss it. See you in the next video.